It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, my co-host is with me, the wonderful, lovely, amazing, all dressed in, I imagine, all black today, but I only see him from the top up, Andy Grabner. How are you doing, Andy?
Good. It's good that you only see me from the top up because you don't know what's down under.
I know. Hey, you know what? A while back, we had our honorary 150th recording with Mark Tomlinson, but as we know, it wasn't the 150th one. We just figured for timing or whatever.
It was like fake news?
I don't even know. Yes, fake news. Ladies and gentlemen, it was fake news. We're admitting it. But today is our actual, real 150th episode.
Wow.
And someone related to Mark. Somewhat. I don't mean maybe by blood, although maybe, well, who knows? Maybe if you go back far enough.
He speaks German too, a little bit. I know Mark does, and I know our guest does a little bit too, because before you joined the recording session, he talked German with me.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
And, well, so people might be hearing the voice. They may have heard him before. He's been a guest. I think he's been a guest before. I know I've done podcasts with him, and you've done podcasts with him. He's got a fantastic mustache, a fantastic cat with a mustache, very similar to his. And I'm sorry, I love to sing the praises of this guy. He's doing so much for the performance field, especially in areas that haven't really been concentrating on performance. So, I don't know, Andy, why don't you finish the introduction? Because I tried to do in there, but I'm not really good at them. You always do the introduction to the.
I just say, Leandro, hola, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, hallo.
Leandro, ¿cómo estás?
Wie geht's auf Deutsch? Und hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for those kind words, Brian. And wow, I'm on a special episode. The pressure.
Exactly. So
oh my God.
That means you should better not mess it up. Right?
Oh man.
This one will be our lowest rating. I predict it will not, though. I think this will be our second highest rating.
Yeah. I know I'm gonna break things, but I hope for a good, in a good perspective.
Yeah. Hey, Leandro, I think last time when we had you, you were just about to publish your book.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we were talking about it. It's already out there in the world, and I hope people are still enjoying it. I have heard good feedback out of it.
Yeah.
Have you been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for Performance?
Not yet, or that I know. Has anyone given them my number? I'm not sure.
I'm sure they find out. But the thing is, when they call you, you didn't speak Swedish. Maybe somebody from Sweden called and you didn't pick up because you thought strange number.
Those robocalls. I mean, you cannot pick up the phone lately at all.
Yeah.
Hey, for anybody who might not know about the book, what was can you remind our listeners about the title and topic?
It is a hitchhiking guide to load testing projects, a fun walkthrough guide into the steps for a traditional load testing project, where you go on those old phases that you discover what to do, you design or put together a plan, a set of scenarios, automations to do, put up your scripts, create them, and then execute the test, but in a very guiding up the people in a very traditional way to do those scary things.
And I think one of the feedback, I remember that you asked me, and I'm pretty sure Brian and others as well, to give you some reviews before the book was published. I loved it. But then also I think in the end I said, hey, wouldn't that be what's next? Because you've been talking about, let's say, as you just reiterated, a more traditional way to load testing projects. And then I said, hey, we've been talking about DevOps, we've been talking about SRE, we've been talking about automation, we've been talking about Agile. And I said, hey, we want to have you back if you want to tell us more about these topics. And then you, I think, and I have the email open, I think it was around Christmas time last year, you said, hey, I want to talk about Agile for real, and I add some salsa and some guacamole on it, because you also want to talk a little bit about Aztec automation sacrifice pyramid. I mean, there's a lot of things you threw to us in an email, which is I love to, especially start with Agile for real, because the thing that you brought up is some people think they're doing Agile, whatever Agile means for them. For some, however, it feels like they're just impersonators or imposters. They're just pretending they're doing Agile, but actually they're not doing Agile. And I know you've been teaching people and you have your own experiences, and this is why I would like to dive into that topic. What can you tell us? What have you learned? What are you teaching? And how can people figure out if they're doing Agile for real or not?
Well, and good that you bring it up from the book's perspective and what was pending, because I can say right now it's a work in progress, part 2, where I'll be diving fully into how to tackle this performance thing in an agile way. Mm-hmm. And an element while writing it that has been jumping a lot at me, and it's not just from the book, it has been jumping since I started to get into this agile thing and learning it and understanding it, not just in the traditional way that, hey, I'm on daily stand-ups and now I am agile, mm-hmm. is something that I started to notice while I was, as a consultant, jumping on different organizations, providing services, and finding lots of them saying, yeah, now we're agile, we do this Scrum thing, DevOps, and all those terminologies. I'm going to use them somewhat interchangeably. The people that know the trades, please don't jump at me. I'm mm-hmm. just referencing all these modern methodologies to produce software. And I think that the big element here, as you mentioned, the thing that when I started to learn it better and understand this beast was that, hey, you are not agile. You are not. I mean, you are embracing it. You are doing some of the things. You are trying at least, but it doesn't feel like to me that you are getting the benefits. And I came up with an example that has helped some people to understand what I'm trying to say. So being agile is more or less like being a fit person in terms of fitness, doing some workout, staying in shape, like trying to take care of the good old gut box that we were given. And some people may be just saying, yeah, I'm so fit, I'm taking care of my body, just because they wear yoga pants. I mean, it's the pandemic, we all do that. And some others are, and I have people that I know that started to do some of the right things, and then they ended up just having protein milkshakes, but that's it. They just drink lots of protein milkshakes. I'm like, well, you're still not there. Some others would buy the most modern jogging shoes and have them wearing them all the time. And yeah, I'm super fitness now, and I'm a speedster. And I have never seen you running or actually doing the thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that we all can agree on more or less what are the kind of things that make you a fit person, right? That you more or less take care of your what you eat, doing some exercise, like whatever you do. It's really, really good to have the yoga pants, to have some protein and all of the things that I said. But there are key elements that if you're not doing them, it's like, okay, well, good for you. Mm-hmm. And it's very similar.
You. What a write-off. It's so polite. Good for you. Hey, good for you.
You're I mean, you're at least in your mind trying, but that's not it. You're not getting the benefits of what we are looking for and trying to be fit. Which I would say, be more or less acting up, doing some sort of exercise, given if you are into weights or swimming, running or golfing, yoga, whatever you do, mm-hmm. or what you're looking to at getting good at. And the second would be some sort of consistency. Like, we all this is exactly the good time of the year for that example. We are all in January going, New Year, resolutions that, I'm going to be going. But third week of January or starting February, we're like, I'm going to, and little by little you start, show up. If you show up there, at least, I would say once a week or twice, and my personal opinion would be the bare minimum to consider like, hey, you're trying to keep good care of your physical, staying in shape, right? And it's very similar with Agile. With the Agile practices, I see all over the place that, daily stand-ups, we have a Kanban board, we do the Scrum meetings and these plannings and the backlog and the reviews. But most of the organizations that I've been at are not doing the key components. Like I said with the gym, most of them are not doing them or getting those benefits. And don't get me wrong, there's a benefit to doing the daily stand-ups. There are benefits of organizing, following up, having little pieces of deliverables. But to me, there are three components. Like I said with the gym, that would define if you are truly embracing this Agile philosophy and had me down the rabbit hole to read, who's his name, Jeff Sutherland's Scrum book, where all of these things are described, I think, as a starting point. And I think that some of them, and keeping it with the gym example, get into the CrossFit mindset, where everything is about CrossFit and the life starts to spin around it. But it's not anymore about being fit. It becomes about CrossFit. It's like you're doing the craziest exercises you're doing. And on Agile, I have noticed that as well. It's like religiously the daily stand-ups and start to polish and the burnout chart and all those things that become for the sake of Agile, not for the benefits that Agile will bring us. And I think I've turned around these topics, but I think the first one that is really critical to achieve this agility would say to be releasing to production frequently. There's most of the time, that's a key component. Some may get benefit to releasing to those pre-production environments, staging, QA, any of the flavors that you know that come before production. But the key element of it is release frequently into it so that your end users, whoever has to use the software that you're creating, have the capability to give it a try, to start using it, to start seeing. That's the point of these sprints, these little deliverables, so that everything can continuously be showing up. Hey, what do you think of this new thing? Let's try it out. Let's push it for, to say it in a way, for the world to see it. And to close the loop, the second element would be to pay attention to what happens once it's out there, once the end user is using it, if the person or the audience likes it, hates it, is having bugs, is having problems, and quickly loop it back. Because on one hand, pushing frequently to production, some say like, we are pushing once a month. I mean, to me, that's pushing it a little bit, because then to close the loop and have that feedback would be another month. And then to push a new thing would be another month. And 3 months later, you barely are fixing something that was requested 3 months ago. It's like a very, very long period to have those risks in production or be holding up things. And that's why those 2-week sprints are happening. That's the main reason, to give you a chance to push in front of people these new things and quickly get feedback and pay attention to that feedback. Would be hear the people and act on what you're hearing, because other organizations like, you have problems, but we're working on these new features and that's all they care about. Or we have this deliverable, this big release in 6 months. And that goes a little bit against this Agile philosophy that you should be able to continuously check see if what you're doing makes sense, if it's okay, if it's good, if you're going in the good direction, and be able to, in an agile way, change direction. Otherwise, you're still blindly driving towards a goal that who knows if it's going to be really what generates the impact that you're looking for. And the same story that we had with the waterfall days. You'll find out in 6 months, in a year, when the release happen, and if anything is found out, maybe a waste, but we will see in the next 6 months when we do another one. Mm-hmm. And many organizations are not aware of those key elements. They are just into like, yeah, I have the yoga pants and the protein powders and all that, but they are not doing or getting the real benefits from these philosophies or these methodologies. Where I think the third component that I would say, and this is the one where I'm not so sure, I wouldn't set it in stone, but I would say that your scope is not defined or with a clear end date for a real agile project. Most of the solutions that are developed in an agile way, you keep switching lanes or changing direction, or this little piece I'm going to put it, this one I'm going to remove it. And it's not like by the end of year, this software has to be released with this, and that. It's somewhat elastic, no pun intended on other modern technologies. But it shouldn't be like an old waterfall project. It's this date, these deliverables, and it's going to be the end of the world if you don't commit to that. Because especially you're hearing your market, your audience, your end user to change those directions. And there are some things that you may not be able to complete, or you may not even complete. Say like, hey, the user hated it, does not need it. We thought it was good, but no one is using it. Let's drop it. Why don't we add something new? Or just we sadly wasted some time on this, just out of the picture. Let's not waste more time, because if we did it in a long release process, it will be 6 months until we figure out and we waste even more time. Mm-hmm. So those are the advantages. And most organizations have no idea. They are just jumping into it for the sake of some buzzwords or activities that we see all over the place. And it's amazing to me. And even reading the Scrum book, as I said, it dives a lot into the process, because yes, you want people to learn the process, but then you get lost into the weeds, and it's like the process for the sake of the process and not for reaping the benefits of all this.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
wow.
I mean, yeah, he brought up a lot of points that I would love to dive into, but I also want to make sure we stay focused on a little bit on performance. But one thing, I want to highlight a couple of things, that getting into smaller deployments or like breaking bigger features into smaller things and allowing you to be flexible and then reacting to it is obviously the desired state, but it's also very challenging because it needs a lot of planning. How can you break down a big feature into smaller chunks that you can deliver something that is actually valuable? And I think the trade-off is always, yes, of course, I want to deploy something that already provides some value, but it has to have at least a minimum value, because otherwise you are making your users mad. I just had a conversation yesterday with a friend, and in Austria we had years ago the switch over to a new system for electronic track record keeping of healthcare data. Right, so basically doctors were able to put in all of your data electronically, and they had this new system. And when they deployed that system, they forgot a search feature. So that means every doctor couldn't search for the patients, couldn't search for any of the records. So they had to manually click through everything. And obviously it was a minimal viable product, but it was not nobody used it anymore. Nobody started using it because not so viable. So I think this is important. And I think, this was years and years ago.
Hey, Andy, can I add one thing to that? Because this fits right in the idea of like, agile. We had a similar thing with the medical records here. And I went to a doctor and it was for my daughter. And their version of the electronic records is they took all the notes by hand, scanned it in, and then pulled up the PDF.
Yeah, this doesn't give you any value, right? So that's one thing. The other thing, I really also love the fact that when you deploy fast and frequent, you can get feedback, but then you also need to be very careful, I believe, as the one that makes decisions, to which feedback you listen to and to which feedback you need to be also careful with, because if you listen to every feedback and change direction with every 2 weeks, you're never finding kind of your end goal, right? I think it's also challenging. Yeah. And the last thing, this is now my segue over, what does this mean for performance engineers, or let's say site reliability engineers, or whatever we call them these days? If we move towards a continuous deployment model every other week, what has to change in these teams? What do they need to adapt? Does it help them if they just participate in the stand-ups and they know what they are supposed to do, or what does it mean to be agile for a performance engineer?
And yeah, that's a question and a discussion that I have had even with organizations nowadays. Hey, help us, what type of people do we need and what type of roles? And this is another one that I'm kind of suggesting how organizations should work, as it is you need to change the mindset of how we used to do performance and load testing in the old days, like these big load testing projects where at the end of the project, like a 6-month project, they left the last 3 weeks for a load testing that was somehow supposed to cover all performance possible issues. Already from that departure point was already a little stretching up things, but you would get to those 3 weeks that you gave to the project, and in reality were just a week because everyone else ate that slot of time. And none of that will work anymore in these continuous and agile ways. There's a full change of mindset and practices that a performance engineer, I think that's why you may not be hearing so much the performance tester term anymore, where the tasks of the performance tester before where you are kind of a scripter and then you execute and create the scenarios, do some sort of analysis and generate a load test. But nowadays, I wouldn't say it's so much about those traditional big-ass load tests that we used to have where, almost everything was related to capacity planning. Nowadays, as you say, we already have the software in production. We already have an idea of how it is doing, if we are doing things accordingly. So the way we do things, how we attack it, and who attacks it is going to be very different for performance engineers nowadays. And that's another one. I recently had a discussion with an organization that were asking, like, how many scripters should I hire? And I'm like, I don't think you should hire, because they were migrating to microservices, ditching an old monolith that they had as a solution. Hey, are you still going to use the monolith or working around it? Yeah, a little bit, half of it. Okay, have a couple there. That's unavoidable. You need to keep doing it the old ways with the monolith. But for the new pieces, I wouldn't recommend to have a scripter holding your Agile team with the handover, waiting for things to finish, to do the test and back and forth. You only have technically like 2 weeks if your sprint is a standard. Some teams are shorter, or you have continuous releases. You don't have the time for waiting for a scripter to do that automation, front-end automation. God forbid you're doing that in these new modern times. Sometimes you have to, and there's no other way, but you should not be creating software that is also difficult to test and automate at different tiers. And that brings a little bit the topic of the tiers and the sacrificial Aztec pyramid of automation. But before I get into that, the role of the performance engineer, I think, is more around, I'm not sure if using the term, but evangelization or being an ambassador with the Agile teams, because as well, you have these smaller teams that you should or cannot, depending on the organization, but wouldn't be good that you stay with them. You just come in, teach them about some of these practices, you teach the developers to do automations at the correct tiers in the pyramid. And teach them what are the things that they should care for, be aware or checking, and don't give them or do the fish for them. Teach them how to fish, what type of fishes are interesting, and trying to keep it in the fishing analogy, that the teams become self-sufficient and that can automate some performance metrics and measurements. And I would say with that, you're continuously releasing test for some sort of load, and the performance always, you should have performance testing in the purest definition, like when you measure impact and response times in a given scenario. The base performance testing should be done everywhere all the time, and coming from Dynatrace, observability, all those things, I think you all agree that should be happening.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, like no argument or no question there. And the point for the big, huge load tests, I don't see a true need anymore for doing it always. Rare occasions you will need it. There are so many other practices where you can do some sort of load testing with beta users, releasing into production. Again, you are already in production if you are doing Agile, so you have some idea of how do you respond to some loads. There are very few scenarios like a Black Friday. Of course, you need a load test. They're traditional and try to push it as far as possible. But very specific scenarios. I don't see that the teams should be like some other teams that I met. Like, we need a production load test before we release into production. Why? You released last sprint, you are going to release the next sprint. Don't you already have an idea? Just check the new thing that is not bringing too much noise. And most probably you will be able to do well. And also focus on rolling back if for any reason you have a bottleneck, so that you can tune it. And that's the importance of going back and forth quickly as well.
Yeah.
If you can identify that you have an issue right away, observability-wise, you will notice it immediately in production. Say, hey, alert, these strings in the Toyota production line that you could pull and stop everything and send it back. Can't remember what's the name of that string, but
I think it's stringy mix string face.
like an alert and an alarm is stop the machinery. And it's important to try to release the software with all that in mind, instead of just holding on to those old practices and old methodologies. The role of the performance engineer is more on teaching the people in the team, because they should have some knowledge around what is happening, and if possible, being able to do most of those automations that you should do nowadays, instead of just end-to-end old automations, and help them. Like, okay, you may need to integrate your Jenkins with observability and triggering some stuff after you do a check-in. I can help you to implement it. I can teach you to implement it, but you need it because this, and that. When you do a check-in, have a unit test, service level automation, some things that quickly will tell you if what you just created is okay, and don't waste time waiting to a tester to come in to verify it. And you have the checks in the production line. Here you will hear a lot of analogies with production lines and assembly factories, because that's where Agile came from in some essence or spiritually. But that's the idea. You identify the problem where it's happening and not waiting until, I don't know, in that production assembly line, the car is already on the road and you figure it out when they are already crashing. That's when it gets more costly, more expensive, slower, and all those ugly things that we want to avoid.
Yeah, I think the key there even ties, not to plug your book again, but it ties back to the concept of your first book, right? Because we're going from traditional load testing to more modern style. And if you think about the people who are coming in and let's say net new, right? They haven't been doing the old style load testing. All of this makes, I think, very clear sense. You test the bits that need to be tested, you roll it out, you observe, You have feedback loops and you roll things back. But for the people who've been coming from more the traditional world, I remember when I started hearing stuff, and every time I hear these conversations, I feel a little fear because you're like, but, right? But always realize, number one, you were never testing everything anyway. You were testing the scenarios you scripted for. But number two, all of this idea of not doing, as you called the big ass load test, I guess you should term the word BALT, right? That's the BALT test. It's because you have a bunch of other checks and balances in place. If you're teaching, as you're saying, if you're coaching your developers, to me, performance starts when the code is finished, or actually technically, I guess, before it's written, right? You think about it before you write it. But the first time you could really test it, you don't even need a load. You run one run through of it. And then if it's something that existed before, you can compare it to the other one. Did we increase our CPU time? Did we increase maybe the code lock time? Did we introduce something? Did we improve things? And before it's even under scale, before it's under any load, you can see if there's a net change that's either good or bad, right? So if you're getting people to do that and then maybe test their services and all, right? You're mitigating the risk. You can't do a full risk analysis for everything except for those Black Friday deals. But there are a bunch of checks in places, going back to the factory line, right? There's sensors everywhere for small little deviations to pick these things up to really, really mitigate that risk. And there's a comfort level you have to get to it. But for, again, someone coming from the older style of load testing, or I don't want to call it older, but the bigger style of load testing, right? It's making sure you don't just switch over, but you switch over and you have all those checks in place. And that's the key piece, is having those checks and balances in place so that you are mitigating that risk. And the most important one, as you say, is having something like that 2-week release cycle and a good rollback plan so that if something did escape, you can either roll back or you have a fast path towards a fix if you need to move forward. But these all have to be in place. Right, it's not just we're going to do spot checking and not big, but you have to have everything there though. You have to build it all. Again, you can't just wear the yoga pants, the sweatpants. I love that analogy, by the way. That's a fantastic analogy because, that's me. I'll go do that. I'll buy my new sneakers and I'll work out for a few weeks and then done.
All that there is just the yoga pants for amigo Brian.
One thing I wanted to add, Leandro, is. And maybe you meant this anyway, the way you said it, but I understood it maybe incorrectly. You said the performance engineers are more like mentors, so teaching them how to build the tests and how to integrate them with Jenkins. For me, it feels like, at least the way I tell it to our users and the community, I want to encourage the performance engineers to not only teach them how to write scripts and then how to integrate it with the CI/CD, but actually provide that level of automation already so that the engineers only need to check in their description of what they want to have tested, their test scripts, whatever, like K6S or other Neotis, what other tools we have out there, then check in their definition of what metrics are important for them in Git. But then that I don't think that every engineer or engineering team should figure out how to now integrate all of these tools in the pipeline. I think this is what I thought, at least a modern performance engineer, is that they're working with the platform teams, the pipeline teams, the DevOps teams, whatever team that is, and kind of bake performance into the pipeline, and then obviously enable, and this is where the mentoring comes in, show developers, hey, when you create a new microservice, here is where you put in your test folders, here's where you put your tests, here's where you put your observability definition, here's where you put in your SLIs and SLOs. And then from that on, every time you check in, we will make sure that your tests get executed.
That you are assuring that performance, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes a little bit in line what you were saying, Brian. Maybe I didn't go as far at the explanation, and there's I'm toying with the term PDD, test-driven development, performance-driven development, where not even in the definition or the meetings when you are doing the sprint planning and what we're going to do, or creating the requirements on your tasks on your Kanban board. From the very beginning, when you are about to start a project, bring on the performance engineer and say, hey, Mr. Performance Engineer, what would you recommend? Do we need to have this Jenkins pipeline? Our solution is going to be created, I don't know, in C# or in Python. What tools, at what levels, what best practices? And even at a level of infrastructure, how many of us have walked into a load balancer that is misconfigured just because it was just dropped down out of the box? And some of these little problems and defects, the performance engineer should have some assessment, give a feedback. And when the team establishes these processes, as you said, Andy, we have this new requirement. Not all of them are going to be the same. Not all the teams will use the same tools, the same integrations, and one process may require more attention on web performance, one requirement, and the other may be more on database. I don't want more than 10 connections to the database or that the query brings back this much information. Some of those things should be defined at the very moment in those sprint plannings where we create the backlog and say, this to-do, this task that I'm putting on the Kanban board has a check for performance that when the developer finishes it, can be moved to done. And this includes having some sort of levels of automation, unit testing, and some checks and passes for, hey, you just created a database request, should not be reading more than this number of records, not do any full table scan, and response in this period of time for 5 threads. To just give a quick example, right? And to be completed as done and be able to be fully checked in or move further in our repositories or even to production should come paired up with some of those automations, unit testing, service level testing, and some of what I was wanting to say with the automation pyramid to make sure that we have coverage where we need it or should have it at the earliest. Checks and balances at the earliest. I keeping with the gym reference, you are going to the gym because you want to lose X amount of pounds. Mm-hmm. That's it. Have your SLOs, SLIs defined for that little element so that you create software with all that included, which you know is important, and you'll be able to use it even once you're in production. I mean, some of those things hand in hand, and if you teach the developers, to give an example, to do those automations, to do those things, they are the ones creating the code. They are the ones that understand it better and how to check it. I mean, if it's a service, if it's a unit, it's super fast, super straightforward. Shouldn't be leaving it for a tester to wait and see, and hey, what did you change? What are the different? The developer already knows it. And most of the modern services, microservices, and unit tests are pretty much function calls or method calls for classes. Should be done there. It's the most efficient way. Mm-hmm. I mean, and to jump a little bit on...
Amen.
Yeah, so I think that's the quietness. We're like...
Yeah, so quiet. I was about to do a drop mic and get out.
And I think I think Brian, what you were alluding earlier, right? We want to come back to my earlier thought. If we are modern performance engineers, help build this build the framework or help build the platform. Obviously, I need to plug in what we do around Captain, because that's exactly what we try to do. And by the way, a lot of this was inspired talking about performance and performance as a self-service by Mark Tomlinson, because Mark Tomlinson was the one who showed me and told me the story, what he did at PayPal back in the days when he automated the whole sequence of actions. When a developer wanted to get some performance feedback, the only thing they had to do is they had to create a Jira ticket, and that triggered the automation, and the automation deployed, tested, and then pulled back metrics and put it back on the same Jira ticket. So the Jira ticket became the trigger of the automation. Today we would probably use just a pull request, and that would then trigger the build, the deployment, the test. And we're trying to do this, whether we with what we do with Captain, we're trying to provide this as well as one of the use cases.
Yeah. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, Andy, as the performance engineer, to enable the developers as much as possible. We don't want to do the fishing for them, right? As you said, Leandro, but at the same time, I think an easy way out a lot of people take is to push it on the developer, right? So what can we as performance engineers do to enable them and make the efforts that they have to contribute as easy and seamless as possible? And that's where I think a lot of it comes into this establishing a framework, maintaining a framework, and then teaching the developers about what's important about performance, what to look out for, so that they just have to plug in a few things. It's a low effort on their part, but it gives them the ownership without the maintenance or, how should we even tackle it? I think that's where performance engineer can use their expertise and their knowledge to build that all up for them and say, here's your inputs, plug your stuff in here, and you'll be good to go. And I want to point out, sorry, you had a comment on that one, sorry.
No, and that level, some automation tools that are designed or are code-based so that the developer, hey, this one uses Python, this one is JavaScript, this one, all of them, and here a plug for the ones that like JavaScript, K6 can use it, and and it's the goal, like, hey, Mr. Developer, you don't need to learn this new or thick SDK clients or user interfaces, drag and drop and complicated. It's just almost the same code that you are doing already in the solution. Just write a couple more lines, hit it. Straightforward. Make it as easy and transparent for them. Agreed.
And one comment unrelated, because I guess we got to wrap up in a moment, but I wanted to point out that there's a term that you need to be aware of for the wearing of the workout pants and the workout clothes and the fancy sneakers without it. It's called athleisure, a combination. It's a fashion term, athleisure. And we have before COVID-19 hit Denver, we've had for years a pandemic of athleisure in Denver. Everywhere you go, people just wearing the workout clothes to the supermarket, to pick up the kids, even out to eat. It's a really such an important concept though, right? And it's human nature. What you're talking about is human nature. Is I want to do this cool new thing, so I'll get all the tools and all the looks, but I don't necessarily practice it and maintain it and execute it, but I look like I am. Same thing happens, I think we see with Kubernetes. So many people are like, oh, Kubernetes is there, let's move to Kubernetes. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, we spin it up and we lift and shift our stuff onto Kubernetes. Like, no, you didn't do it. You did not do it. You're not doing it. You're not learning anything. You're not getting the benefits. And that comes to anything. If you look behind me, I have all this fun musical gear, right? A lot of it you acquire because it looks fun, and then it sits there for months before you even get around to it, to start exploring what you can do, unless you're making a practice of really exploring it. And this just really, really comes back to human nature over and over again. And we see it manifest itself in everything, including the Agile. There's the old joke, what's a stand-up meeting? A meeting in a room where there's no chairs. Doesn't mean it's a 5-minute meeting. It's just got complicated. Anyhow, it's my rant. Sorry.
No, I think we all have those type of rants because we have faced all those situations. It can be frustrating at times, and some like what you say, like, hey, you're clearly not doing workouts. Why are you wearing the yoga pants or things like that, right?
Walk around with a spray bottle, keep a constant sheen of apparent sweat, looking like, oh no.
You just sprinkle in. I totally did it, and I see organizations doing that. Like, no, truly, really, I just did. No, you're not. No.
So then maybe, Leandro, to kind of wrap it up here, what I took away from this is that I like the gym analogy, like Brian does. And I think what we want to do is we want to encourage people that really want to make a change in their organization. If they find anybody, if you see something, say something, right? If you see somebody that is just faking to be agile, try to be a role model and really do it for real and show them the benefits of it. If you not do it once a week, if you continuously do it. For the performance engineers out there, there's obviously, first of all, more developer natural tools, friendly tools, as you said, right? No longer the UI rich point and click tools, but more everything is code, whatever language or declarative, and it's maybe in YAML or JSON, and also tools that can be fully automated and integrated in your pipeline. And I encourage every performance engineer to look at these tools, figure out in your development teams what are the languages of choice. I think that's also good, because while scripting languages are easy to learn, but if you already have let's say, knowledge of Python or JavaScript, then, pick a tool that provides these languages, makes it easier. And then also work with the DevOps teams or the pipeline teams to integrate those into your pipeline, because in the end, the developer needs to make as little change as possible to get the automated feedback on performance. And I think that should be the goal of every performance engineer.
Yeah, I will close with a small analogy there as well from what you said. Making the task as easy and transparent for your team as possible, because many times the developers are like we were all when we were kids, children, and our parents were forcing us to brush our teeth before going to bed. It's a little thing. It takes just a couple of minutes. You should do it a few times a day, and it just takes a little bit of time. If you don't, the consequences may be long sits at the dentist, painful sits with it, and having lots of issues. And in the same way to the children, when I get to that, don't give them the full blast of mouthwash and flossing, and just give them a funny toothbrush, tiny for them, that is, I don't know, Baby Shark themed or something like that. Yummy paste for them to be excited about it. So to not to suffer, little by little, you start to introduce them, you start to give them a path to, instead of having to take them to the dentist and have root canals or ugly things.
So gamification for the kid. It's a great analogy. Make it a game, and I think we need to find the same thing for IT.
Baby Shark themes for IDEs.
Yeah.
I dare everyone to take that song out of your heads now.
Yeah, thank you. Some people fortunately might not know, although they did, I don't know if you've seen Ted Lasso. It's a fantastic show on many levels, even just from a leadership point of view. But there's a guy named Jamie Tart, and this chant is, Jamie Tart, do. Anyhow.
Okay. Now you took this tune into everyone's mind.
Yeah, I'm just obsessed with that show lately.
Me too.
Thank you so much for this. This is fantastic. It's always great to have you on. And thank you for being part of our 150th actual show. I'd like to say, if there's anybody out there who's been listening to us since day one, get in touch, because I'd like to buy you a gumball. It's about the budget we have for the show. So, but no, seriously, to everyone who's been listening for however long you've been listening, if you just tuned in or if you've been listening for a while, thank you all so much. Leandro, thank you for everything you're doing for the performance community. We need more people like you that are actually trying to help and not just get speaking credentials, but really trying to help people and do so much more. So it's fantastic, and I'm glad to know you. And
we gotta make a better world. Thanks,
yes.
amigo. Thank you.
For the children,
for the children and the baby shark.
And the baby shark. Yes. I think you're forgetting that stuck in my head. Andy, any closing? You said that.
You said it well. I just say goodbye. Hopefully, we'll see each other soon in person.
Someday.
Take care, everybody.
Someday. All right, bye-bye, everyone.
See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.